You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting The Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
We are continuing our conversation in church music history, 100 years of church music history in the LCMS with Benjamin Kolodziej. He is church organist and musicologist and our friend here on The Coffee Hour. I think I can say that now, right?
Yeah.
Our
he also
friend.
has like a ton of hymnals, and I'm really jealous.
Yes. It's like
Come visit anytime.
I want to.
How many? Do you know how many you have in your collection of
My
hymnals?
computer does, because my inventory is on there, but I haven't asked it lately. It's hundreds and hundreds.
So your computer
I
has...
love it.
Well, I write it in the
That's
bibliography
smart.
every time I get one, but I haven't counted lately.
You kind of
It's a
struck me
lot.
as maybe a card catalog sort of person. No? Do you have a card catalog of them too?
I don't.
Okay.
I do like paper, you're correct, but space concerns are such that
I
card
love
catalog really isn't practical.
All right.
I
Looking
love
at
it.
looking at 100 years of church music history, the first 100 years of church music history in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which actually, if we're talking about the early years, we have to use the full name, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of
Missouri, Ohio, and other states.
Yes.
But you got to say it in German, too.
Yes, I can't. So we've taken a look at just maybe a decade or so of that first 100 years. And one point from last time that I wanted to revisit was how important music was, how important making music is, that education included music for all students, no matter where you were going or what your future vocation was. Making music was a part of that education. And I just wanted to compare that to where we are today and the role of music in the family, in the congregation, in education. You know, today we listen to music for entertainment. At the time that we're looking at, in the mid-1800s, making music was an important part of family life, even, not just the church on Sunday morning. I just wanted your thoughts on that, on comparing the role of music in so many different aspects of life then versus now.
Well, and I have to contain myself with
Because
that
this
question
could be a
because
whole dissertation.
it's hard for me to be objective because
Sure.
you've alluded to the fact that we're now consumers of music. We don't make it ourselves. That's not where we come from. We buy music, we listen to it nonstop, maybe, but it's not something that has the emphasis in schools or in our families or even churches. I mean, where do we sing communally? Maybe the ball games, I don't know, church, hopefully, but there's not a lot of that's left. And Carl Schalk had said something one time about music, church music being essentially of the people, liturgical, in a way like folk music, but not from the top down. Not by recording companies or publishers inflicted upon us. You know, that's new. That's new. I mean, yeah, Bach publishes music. He could earn some money. The great composers all did. But that's something different. Now we have giant, huge mega corporations determining our tastes, and all based on wanting economic concerns. And I think that's new. That's a challenge. It's taken away music from our daily lives. Maybe kind of segues to what I did want to talk about in terms of liturgical music education. And that would be the founding of the Addison Seminary,
Oh, yeah.
which the Addison Seminary eventually became Concordia River Forest, Concordia Chicago.
Yeah.
But it was founded in the 1860s as, like we were talking about in Germany, the musicians would be trained classically. Well, they needed an institution here also to train. So it was founded in Addison, Illinois. Originally, there was 2 professors and some rickety buildings, and these boys would come from who knows where. And it was actually in the midst and right after the Civil War. So it wasn't just boys. There was records of veterans who were missing arms and legs still coming, wanting to do something different with their lives to make a difference. And, 30 years old coming to study to be a Lutheran school teacher, which is what Addison was established to do. So it was originally 2 teachers, and the point was to teach the classic Greek, Latin, writing, penmanship, arithmetic, then music, organ, piano, violin. Mm-hmm. And then after a course of a number of years, some of them elected to become pastors. Some of them could be called out to be the teacher, musician in the parish. So that was a way in which music was integrated into the life of the church through their training institution.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting at that time, the time period we're talking about, mid-1800s, like the only music that people had in their homes was music that they made.
They made.
So in order to have that, like we don't have, can I call that a luxury? We don't have that anymore. Like we can consume somebody else's. They had to consume, if they wanted it, they literally had to do it in order
It's not the norm anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are families that do it, but it's not the norm. It's not average family.
Bring back
today.
the family hymn sing.
Yeah.
I'm all about that. Let's do it. So, sorry, I just wanted to throw that point in there. But I think along with what you're saying about the Addison Seminary, now that the LCMS is founded, how did that affect the church music, the formation? The seminary is part of that. But nearing the turn of the century then, in the late 1800s, what did that landscape kind of look like for how music education was happening and how music was happening in churches?
Well, I think a very salient point is every church was to have a school. It was not optional. You had to. Now that's not so much the case, but back then, the school was not a luxury; it was a necessity. Many of these churches were out in the country. There was no educational opportunities otherwise, so it was very practical. So, if you were going to have a church and the church had a school, then you had to have a pastor and you had a teacher. So that's essentially the ideal. Of course, this didn't always work itself out like this in real life. But the ideal was you had an individual pastor and you had an individual teacher. And the teacher would be in charge of music. So, and church music too. School singing and church music. So through the late 19th century, the Addison Seminary became more adept and cultivated into shaping their graduates as to what was needed. So, like, there's a number of people. Karl Brauer, I wanted to bring him up because he was the first full-time music professor in the LCMS. He came in, I think it was 1867 to Addison. He was only the third professor. Can you imagine that? Only the third professor is the full-time musician. That's how important this music was to these people. And he wrote a lot. All of the professors did in the Schulblatt. It was the paper of Addison. It eventually became Lutheran Education, and it's still published in its American form. It's English form, I should say. But they would write and they would teach. Karl Brauer was the first professor to do this. He retired in 1897, and he was followed by a fellow called Georg Kapell, K-A-P-P-E-L-L. And interestingly, I played a concert at the seminary yesterday, and I played 3 of Kapell's pieces because I just wanted to,
Of course. Why not?
I've been. His music doesn't exist much anymore. You can't go out and buy his music on Amazon or anything. It's not there. But I have some in my archive at home, and so I played some. It's very romantic sounding. It sounds a little bit like Brahms or Mendelssohn if you're familiar with that style. But actually, Kapell wanted to instill in his students at Addison the importance of Bach. And those musicians from 2 centuries before, or 150 years, whatever it is, that the importance of Bach, the church music counterpoint, and Kapell actually was one of the first concert organists in the LCMS, who actually was good enough to perform concerts, not just to play for church. But throughout the 19th century, it was always important that each student learned not only to teach school, but to play the organ, piano, and violin. The violin requirement was done away with in 1905. You think why violin? Well, if a pastor or teacher were called to many of these churches in the mid-19th century, they probably didn't have an organ. They probably didn't even have a piano. They might have even just been meeting under a tree at first. So a non-keyboard instrument would be very helpful to play. So that's why that So it was removed in 1905 because at that point, pretty much everybody had a church building, and but that's how music was promulgated, and it was important.
I'm sad that the violin kind of went away.
I know. It's still in classical education, though. In a lot of those classical schools, they have to learn it.
It's a mixed blessing, though, because I have to be devil's advocate here. for many years, even at Seward and Concordia, Chicago, it was a requirement that you take organ, and that's great in many cases because many great organists were produced that way. However, if you're not really into that's not your thing, organ really takes a lot of your life.
Yeah.
And it can be frustrating and can take a lot of your time. And I'm afraid that there were probably lots of organists who were produced which shouldn't have been playing the organ. They write about that.
They should have been playing the violin instead.
Or they should have been playing nothing, possibly. and there's certainly articles in the 19th century about raising the level of performance. So on the one hand, it is really good that many students found a new skill, developed their skill. On the other hand, there's that reality that maybe some of them just shouldn't have been playing organ, and they didn't do it maybe wasn't the best thing for them. And that's, that's something that they had to deal with. Mm-hmm. They dealt with that by publishing music. So Capel published music. Get more into the 20th century, we had Albert Beck, some of those people publishing practical music that was easy, but still lovely enough that an organist, let's call them a reluctant church musician, a reluctant organist. And I look even, let's just say the enthusiastic church musician. I mean, looking at their schedules in the 19th century, they were teaching from sun up to sundown, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday was spent preparing for church, practicing. Sunday was church because you usually had a service in the morning and a service in the evening or in the afternoon. These people had no free time. So even though I say there's some reluctant organists who probably shouldn't have been playing, I mean, you understand why that is. They didn't have time to hone their skills.
I love it.
We are learning about the first 100 years of church music history in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod with Benjamin Kolodziej. Today, we'll continue the conversation in just a moment. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason: to use your God-given gifts to help others, to live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world, to live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at cuw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
We are learning about the first 100 years of church music history with Benjamin Kolodziej today in what is growing into a series. I think it's maybe a 100-part series.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Or maybe just a few episodes. So we've made it, up to Addison Seminary, Teacher Seminary, Concordia, which eventually became Concordia University, Concordia Teachers College, and Concordia University, River Forest, now Concordia University, Chicago.
Yeah.
And we could, I'm sure, spend about 30 episodes just talking about the development of Lutheran church workers through that. But let's see, we left off with, who did we leave off with? Oh, the name escapes me now. Capel, I think, is where we left off. Okay. Any more about Capel, or do you want to move on to other church musicians.
Well, so Capel represents that change from the 19th to 20th century. Hey, we made it. Because he's hired in 1897, and he spans the transition when they move from Addison to Chicago in 1914. And he continues to teach until his death, which I think was 1934. So he's kind of that transitional person. But something also really important happened during this time, too, and that was the transition to English.
Right.
You remember? Well, we don't remember, but we know what happened. And that was kind of important when it came to church music. So we talked earlier about C.F.W. Walter's hymnal, and that it was a text-only version of the Lutheran chorales and their original text to their original tunes. There were chorale books that were published to accompany the hymnal that the organist played from. The congregation didn't see the music. But these were produced throughout the 19th century. But, of course, in the late 19th century, you begin to see this movement toward English. It happened much before World War I. Most people think it happened then and then solidified with World War II, but it was already moving that way in the 1870s and 80s. But what that meant was that these Germans didn't like to change. They liked they liked their Walter hymnal. They liked once they knew how to sing it, they were going to sing the versions that they knew, and there would be no changes. And of course, this was a problem. The other thing I should mention was that Walter had a liturgy that in his Kirchenagenda from 1856. Not that that matters, but it was based on Luther's Deutsche Messe. Now I know that's technical here, but the Deutsche Messe basically, and we sing the Kyrie, we sing the Gloria, we sing the Agnus Dei. The Deutsche Messe replaced those with hymns. So you replace Kyrie, God, Father, Son, Heaven above, and all glory be to God on high became the Gloria. That was Walther's preference, and he structured a liturgy very much around that. But in the late 19th century, we have developed the common service, which is what we know, basically, the old 1941 hymnal, TLH, that was the common service that people love to love or love to hate, that. But that was such an important hymnal. But that was a common service. That was very different than what these Germans had been used to doing since the 1840s. So that there was some tension there as the English developed, not only the translations of the hymns, but into an English sort of liturgy, which was not just a translation, it was a totally different form. And that common service, so when I say the common service, it's basically like Divine Service 3 in LSB or page 15. That common service represented a second strand of Luther's liturgical thinking. That was the Formula Messa, technical, but it was a second strand. Luther had the two. So both are very Lutheran, and they're very faithful. But the earlier one is preferred by Walter, and the later Lutherans in the 19th century developed that common service, although it was certainly uniquely American. There was nothing 16th century about its presentation. So there was some, as you imagine, tension around that. And when Concordius had to start publishing materials in English and the like. So that was probably the next inflection point, music history.
Yeah, changing a language in a church body affects everything. And you've got to do all of that work to make all of those new resources and then also convince everyone to use them, which may have been the more difficult part of all of that. That's a lot. That's a big culture shift in a church body. What else did that affect? I mean, obviously the hymnal and liturgy. How else did that shift affect music and musicians in the early 1900s?
Well, this is maybe going into details too much, but it's really terribly interesting.
Oh, good.
Because if you're an organist, you play the Walter liturgy one way. and you play the common service liturgy a totally different way. And this is something that I had not realized until I decided a while ago that I'm going to approach this 19th century like I would when I go to a church. On Sunday morning, I asked the pastor, it's funny, we talked about how the things that we do on a regular basis, we don't write down, we don't really think are that important, and we don't even notice. So when I go to a church and as a visiting organist, I have very specific questions that I ask. And I never, the musician or the pastor, they live in that world. They don't understand. I'll have to ask the questions very specifically. And it's because oftentimes it's like, okay, after the sermon, do we go straight into the offertory or...
Yeah.
Oh no, we always sing 3 verses of something else. I think like everybody does this, but you don't know.
Obviously.
So you ask,
local traditions.
You just know this, and so I thought, well, I'm going to approach this Walter liturgy the same way, asking these questions if I were going to play the service. And what I found is that these services were pretty long, and had lots to do with the music. Some of these chorale preludes. We're used to our organists maybe playing the hymn through once before. These organists in the 19th century with a Walter liturgy could play 5 minutes worth. And it wouldn't necessarily even be based on the hymn tune. It could be secular music. Just very odd. And we find in the late 19th century, they're writing, even the Addison professors are writing, it would be best if organists played music before the hymn that was based somewhat on the hymn tune, and avoid orchestral transcriptions or music that's not related. But if you have to do that, at least let it be in the spirit of the hymn. And I find that very odd. I mean, we would not think of that way. As a little organist, of course, you learn the hymn prelude presents the tune, the melody, the rhythm, the key. That was not the case. And if you think about it, the congregation didn't really need a lot of introduction. They knew these tunes. Mm-hmm. It was ingrained. So much of what the organist did was just kind of to set the mood for all these things and to play modulations and transitions. So that was the Walter liturgy kind of necessitated that. Whereas when we changed to the English, the common service, there was less of that. Although, if you're really nerdy and if you've heard on YouTube the recordings from the records in 1940 when TOH was released, the records that were sent to the congregations, you should look that up on YouTube.
Oh yes,
it was done here in St. Louis. If you listen to them, you hear a bit of what I'm talking about. You hear the organist modulates and plays these transitions that we're not used to doing, in order to provide a pitch for the next thing. It's just very complicated and a bit odd. And that was in 1940. That's modern times. Yeah. But there's still vestiges of that performance practice.
Did you find actual records? These
I have not found. I don't know the
actual vinyl.
No, but somebody did and put them. Carl Schalk told me about that YouTube video, and I found it. Somebody has the record.
My guess is there's a really good chance that those were actually etched at KFUO.
Oh, yeah. Now I need to know that. Somebody at CHI must know this.
You got to go to the archives
because
figure this out.
We had a machine. Mm-hmm. We don't use it anymore, but we had a machine. It may even be, I don't know, there may be some artifacts still over at Concordia Historical Institute. We had one of the few machines for etching vinyl or records. Yeah, exactly.
Totally looking this up right now. Sorry, guys.
All right. I don't have enough time to unpack another question in this episode, so we're just going to have to do another one. All right. Well, thank you, Benjamin, for getting us through about half of 100 years.
Close.
We're making progress.
We're making progress. That's right. All right. We'll get in another episode looking at 100 years, the first 100 years of music history in the LCMS with Benjamin Kolodziej. You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.